Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of It's Your Own Time You're Wasting. Terry and Olly talk teaching with me, Olly Furnival, over here in Japan, and my good friend and ex-colleague Terry Wood in London. How you doing,
Hello.
Terry?
Hello. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, good, thank you. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about teaching in schools in television and film, focusing mainly on the UK, but also Terry's going to speak a little bit about other countries, France and America later on. So yeah, I'm going to basically mainly give the questions to Terry, and Terry's going to discuss, and then I'll come back, Terry, with any points. Is that okay?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so first of all, Terry, I wonder how do you feel as a teacher watching education being portrayed on the screen? And do you think other professions, people in other professions feel the same?
Well, initially pleased because certainly if we go back to when I was first teaching in the very late 80s and 90s, there wasn't a lot. I mean, for our generation, we'd had Grange Hill for kids. We'd had great films like Kes, which we'll come back later, we'll talk about later. It was very thin on the ground. It was all about police. You know, if you're talking about the big um, core sector jobs, it was public sector jobs. It
Sure.
was the police, it was hospitals. They
Yeah.
dominated, and they still do to a certain extent. So there wasn't that much on teaching. I think that's changed a bit. So gratitude first that we were actually getting a go, and then quite often, to be honest, most of the time replaced by amusement because it was so ridiculous and bemusement. Like, oh
Sure.
my God, I thought this might be at least an attempt at being accurate, and it isn't really. And then even occasionally annoyed and frustrated by
Yes.
the whole thing. But there are some little bright lights within that we'll talk about later. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's inevitable when it comes to the big jobs, the big public sector jobs that so many people do. There's such a rich vein for drama there, particularly the police and hospitals, obviously more
Sure.
so even than schools. They're going to come along quite frequently. But if I had to give you a ballpark figure, it not is a kind of whole package over all the time I've been watching them. Not wonderful in to large degree. Which
Yeah, and
yours?
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, growing up, you always had the Bill and Casualty, and well, and then a wide range of detectives. So there wasn't that much, as you say, Grange Hill, which, funnily enough, I've been watching from the start over the last few months, and I'll
Oh,
talk
have
about
you?
that
Okay.
later. Yeah, it's been really fun. But yeah, I mean, I'm more of the before as a teacher, I didn't really think about it, but when I
No.
was a teacher,
Yeah.
always a little bit overprotective about what really goes on and what other people think they know about what goes on. And I'm guessing the police. Well, my dad
Oh,
was a police officer, and he'd say
yeah.
to me when I talked to him about cracker and things like that, which was, they were the best, the
Yeah.
probably what we would see as most realistic. And he'd still like turn his nose up at him and say, no, nothing like that at all. And and I've got a cousin who is a lawyer in court, and we've had discussions about, very famously the series 2. I know it got criticised of Broadchurch and the court scenes
Oh,
there. He was
okay.
absolute farcical. So I think probably a lot of people in our jobs we feel a little bit protective and you don't really know what it's like. And yeah, that's certainly as I've got older, a little bit more miserable with my TV habits has certainly come into my thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I do. I totally agree. I mean, the thing about, police officers and doctors and nurses and so on, they're all going to feel exactly the same. Oh my God, look at this. It's not remotely like that. We can ask later whether that matters. Don't know. Does
Sure,
it really
sure, yeah,
matter? It's drama and it's fiction at the end of the day. I think there is a fundamental difference, though, and this is why teaching has often been so inaccurately portrayed on British television and in film, is that everybody went to school. Now,
yeah,
if you're a writer and you're writing about hospitals or about the police force and murder and crime, you've got to do your research if you're
sure,
not from that world, because you're going to go terribly wrong if you don't. But everybody went to school. So it tends to be, oh, I remember what it was like. I don't have to do my research. I was at school in the 1970s or 80s or whatever. So I'll just go with my memories, which are going to be faulty at best and obviously at worst completely out of date,
yeah.
anachronistic in all sorts of ways. So I think that's a big difference. The one thing we have got to go against maybe all of this inaccuracy that we might be talking about later is documentaries, which we're not going to
Yeah,
talk about today. We can do that another time. For example, the Educating series, starting with Educating Essex, that they were so well done in showing a proper picture of what education's
sure,
like,
sure,
particularly in secondary schools today, that they've kind of given us a nice little counterbalance to all the terrible inaccuracies.
sure.
So yeah, pleased at first, increasingly bemused when they roll out is would be the summary answer.
And of course, as you say, it's got to be drama. No one wants to sit at home and watch a TV drama where they're actually going to watch an hour of a French lesson. Something's got to happen to
Yeah,
keep the viewers in,
yeah,
in
yeah. Of
involved.
course, of course, of course.
So, how do you think UK education is generally represented on screen? Is it overall an accurate reflection of real life schools and classrooms?
Again, it goes back to the previous answer, yes and no. I think it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. I mean, there have been
Sure.
high points as early as Kes made in the late 1960s, a book that was written by Barry Hines, who had been an English teacher. I think in the school it was filmed in
Right.
Barnsley, who wrote about something he was still doing when he wrote the book. He was a teacher at the time. It's just a completely, all those that have seen it said it's a completely accurate depiction of teachers and students and schools at that time in that part of the world.
Sure.
Whereas at the same time, you've got things like To Sir with Love with Sidney Poitier coming in. I think it was a London school as an African American teacher, and all the issues surrounding trying to teach these very rough East End kids. I think it was wildly inaccurate, but a good
Right.
film all the same. So I think it's continued to be that way all along. So if we go to the things that you'd see on the television now, which I avoid, like The Plague, Waterloo Road, Ackley Bridge, is it called? They're dreadful. They're
Yeah.
just pure soap-like
Yeah.
entertainment. They could be set anywhere. The relationships and the drama and the silliness that goes on, they've just chosen to have in a school for the sake of not doing a
Sure.
hospital or a police station or somewhere else. So, there are, I think it wildly fluctuates. And when you do see something that really does work and you think, wow, even the people that are not teachers that can remember their own school days, if they're not that long ago, would say, "Wow, they've got that right, haven't they?" That is really what I remember. That doesn't happen very often, but as we'll discuss later, it does happen.
Yeah.
If
And I
that
think,
answers the question.
and I think because people have so many different experiences in schools, let's say we could talk about a teacher that we say on telly that, is so outrageous. Well, they were the odd
Yeah,
one. So people are going to just kind of remember that and forget everything else that they've seen in the show, in my
yeah.
in my opinion. And do you think the television and films play a role in shaping the public's understanding or their what they think they understand in things like teachers, students, from people
Yeah,
you speak to? How much do you think they believe
I,
it?
I think people aren't stupid. I think we can't patronise. I think the average punter watching the television knows that if they're watching Waterloo Road and Ackley Bridge or Ken Barlow in Coronation Street, we'll come back to Ken Barlow later. Bugbear of mine. They know that
Yeah,
it's fiction and it's nonsense. Their kids are at school. They go to school. They say it's nothing like this. But it
yeah,
can, when it drips away. I mean, the constant portrayal of kids as poorly behaved, schools
yeah.
as chaotic, head teachers as in constant crisis and having affairs with their deputy heads, um, schools constantly under pressure for closure because they're
Yeah.
failing. I mean, it's just I think it subliminally can have an impact. I think we in previous sessions we talked about the fact that teenagers get a rough, have a poor image, a falsely
Yes,
poor image. I think they get a rough deal out of it because they get the drama, particularly out of secondary schools. You've got
exactly.
kids up to no good, bullying and being bullied and stealing and getting into trouble and truanting from school and having a go at the teachers and going through all of their teenage angst in front of the world.
Yeah,
Whereas, it's going to be a heightened view. And I think subliminally, I think it can have some impact, particularly
yeah,
if you were particularly if you were in your 70s or 80s and you can't even remember going to school, you'd probably feel that that's what it's like now. They were
yeah,
much better in my days when we weren't allowed to breathe. Well, a
yeah,
lot of schools now, as we've talked about, haven't we? When we looked at behaviour management, kids aren't allowed to breathe, probably
sure.
more so than when you and I started. So it
Sure.
does go around full circle. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
by and large, no. But I think there are some tropes. We'll come back to them that
Yeah, I'll ask you about that in a minute.
are
Yeah.
not healthy really, because
No.
and it's a bit dull. Can you not find something else to say? I feel like saying to the script writers, do we have to go here again? Do we have to have the chaotic head teacher that's got a secret
Well,
history? Really?
yeah, I'll ask. Well, actually, I'll ask you about the tropes in the next question. But yeah,
Um,
I see that myself in detectives as well. It's
yeah, yeah,
the hidden, the secret alcoholic. Oh, really? Another one with a secret.
yeah.
Blah blah blah. But I think it's interesting what you say about perhaps older people who maybe aren't in contact with the youth as much anymore, and all they do see it on is through the screen. I think maybe they would have more
Yeah.
of an influence on that. And I suppose the problem is that, yeah, most, as we know, and I hope any teachers new and experienced watching this knows, the vast majority of kids are absolutely brilliant. But does that make good telly? Now there are some good kids, you know, in the shows, of course. It's not all bad, but it's when if I'm watching a drama, I want to focus on that rather than watching kids work quietly in a class. I would assume. So
Yeah.
you've touched on a couple of common stereotypes and tropes about British schools. Yeah, what are the most common ones, do you think? And yeah, how much do you think they influence people's perception who are watching?
Well, I got a nice little list here because I knew you were going to ask me this. Firstly, there are no primary schools in Britain because none of the
Yeah.
things we've discussed, whether it be Kes, To Sir with Love, Ackley Bridge, Waterloo Road, Grange
No.
Hill, are ever set in primary schools.
Yeah.
Primary school teachers must think, what about us?
Yeah.
We have stuff going on.
Interesting.
Never primary school. So that's number one.
Do you think that's because of the age of the children,
Yeah.
the acting age of the children? I don't know.
I think there's, yeah, oh, that's a good point. Yes, that is true. But you could
Which
still have,
they can
you
act
could
at that
still,
age, but you know, might
but
be hard.
even when they did Teachers, that series, Channel 4, that, kind of semi-comedy
Yeah.
that they did in the kind of late 90s, they could have set that in primary school because it was about the teachers, it wasn't about the kids. We
Yeah.
actually didn't see that much teaching in that drama, if I remember
Yeah.
right. Not that I religiously watched it. It was more about the social lives of the teachers. Why couldn't that have been primary? They never are.
Sure.
So that'd be number one. Class size is
Interesting.
number two. Never a class
Right.
size, because it is about getting actors and stages and all of that.
Sure.
But there's never a class more than 10 kids. I mean, the number of times I've seen Ken Barlow teaching, we'll come back to Ken, teaching English to 10 kids in
Yeah.
a classroom, or with a little separate desk before the bell goes and they're all run out without his permission. And of course, they're all from the set. They all live down his street. So he
Go down the
teaches every
street.
kid that he knows. Every kid that he knows, his neighbours he teaches.
The
Class
rebels have
sizes.
their tie on badly to show that they're the rebel.
Well, that's my next one.
Oh,
Bedraggled
sorry. So,
uniforms. Bedraggled uniforms. Tie knots of ties down here.
yeah.
Wearing the most outrageous things with
Yeah.
just maybe a shirt and tie, an open tie that would know. I mean, some of the schools in London that I visit regularly, you might as well be in the army.
Yeah.
They drill them on. They're not allowed to have a single thing that's not acceptable. So that would be the next one: bedraggled uniforms. Oh,
Sure.
free periods and truancy. The number of these kids, good kids, good kids
Yeah.
that feature in these dramas and series and films who never at school are always having. Apparently, they can come home when they've got free period. So they're in a big secondary school, which is like 3 miles away from home, but they nip home for an hour
Yeah.
for a free
Yeah.
period and then tell their parents when it's a
Oh,
free
mate.
period.
And they accept it. The parents,
Yeah,
oh, okay. As if any school in Britain, there's no letter home saying exactly when the students can. These days, I mean, even going back, that just wouldn't happen. And you just see it in the soaps. Oh, okay. What do you mean?
yeah. How do the
Because of
kids get out of school with the security systems now and
yeah,
the passes and the scanning and all of that? You wouldn't. It's like getting out. It's like getting out of Alcatraz in some of the
yeah.
prisons. Next one would be chaotic. I've mentioned this. Chaotic. I mean, chaotic teachers, because if they focus on the lives of the teachers, they've got to have drama. But it's
Yeah.
particularly the chaotic senior leaders having affairs
Right.
with their deputy heads.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, I'm sure that has happened, of course. Life is life.
Of course.
Oh, come on. It's just you can't be that chaotic and run
Yeah.
even a small primary school, never mind
No.
a giant academy or secondary school It just doesn't work that way. Oh, obviously, and this goes to your point about the age of actors. 15 to 16-year-olds all look 28. I think Please Sir
Um,
in the 1970s. If you ever, I don't, have
uh,
you ever seen that?
so as a kid, I don't know why, but if from memory, it was on every Easter. There was the film of it where they went to the countryside, and
Yeah,
yeah,
awful. Yeah.
I've actually there's a British comedy podcast I listened to, and they reviewed Please Sir, and they were just laughing that they literally were 30. These
Oh,
people
at
acting
least
16.
they went
Brilliant,
steeply up from 28, 30. There was some that must
absolutely
have been
brilliant.
pushing 40.
Yeah,
And you see that in a lot of American high school films as well. Things like
yeah,
Grease. Even more serious films. That's the next one. Um, Obviously, threats of closure. There's always going to be a threat of closure. The school that's going to
yeah,
threaten the closure of the school. Well, it doesn't work that way. What are you going to do with these 1,000 kids if you close the school? And the last one I think would be, and more seriously, and we'll come back to this, and I think this has been a bit insidious, particularly in the last decade or two. That's having stories about inappropriate romantic or physical relationships between
yeah,
pupils
yeah.
and teachers, which we know sadly has been an aspect of the profession and will probably continue to be, given the nature of things. But the scrutiny, as we've said, haven't we, is so great now with safeguarding and child protection that I think
Sure.
those sorts of things are dying away quite rapidly. And this insistence with some quite high profile things like The Teacher with Sheridan Smith, which I refused to watch. Sorry, I didn't even,
Right.
can't even give you evidence about it. And Notes from a Scandal, which of course was a very influential film of about 10 years ago, big novel and then film. It has to be increasingly female teachers
Hmm.
having inappropriate relationships with like 15-year-old boys. I'm not sure that happens very often. It
No.
does. But why do we have to choose that for our drama? Can we not find something else to do?
Yeah.
It was watching both of them. I felt certainly no, I didn't watch The Teacher, but watching Notes on the Scandal, it was a bit exploitative of the profession. It was a
Yeah.
bit exploitative of the profession. The thing that came across it didn't do enough to say, you know, teachers are 99.999 recurring percent not like this. Didn't
No.
do enough to do that. And that's
No.
why I thought it was a little bit dangerous. Yourself?
Yeah, no, you made they that did make me laugh. I had a lot of obvious similar ones. I think what they're doing is that you've just said 0.1% does exist. However, in dramas, it's multiplied to becoming 50%. It's
Yeah, or at least
you know,
10%, which is a terrible percentage.
yeah, exactly. I mean, how many times have we seen a drama where you've got the and it's usually in this case it's usually in my from my viewing and I'm nowhere near as well as watched as many as you. It's like the early 40s divorcee woman who drinks too much and
Yeah,
she's okay, but once something goes wrong, she then has a class and takes it out on the kids. Now, probably we've all done that once or twice in our career where we've gone into the class, we've had a bad meeting or whatever, which we don't do and we shouldn't do, but these people do it all the time. It's like there's too much of a mixture of personal life in and the professional life. And that
yeah,
comes in a bit what you said about Barlow, about people, because they're in the same show, they have to they kind of mix up their personal and professional relationships too much. So I think that's a really big annoying one because you can watch so many shows and you've got that short-haired, mouthy, in from their point of view, female who's all powerful 1 minute and then she's got to show that she's going to cry and go crazy. It's just too much of that and very,
yeah.
very few and far between. What I also don't like is the way decisions are made just so quickly. A quick chat in the corridor and suddenly the school's got new rooms for the
Oh,
classroom.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
these take months. These take
They're
policies
turning a
don't.
super tanker around. Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Oh, hang on. This has changed within a minute, and it's like the amount of time it takes to change anything in a school, the policies. It can take a year or two depending on the level of change. And suddenly in a show, oh, that's changed, and that's different now.
and
Um,
the school
yeah,
results are always bad. The school's features are
yeah,
always like under the cosh with Ofsted.
yes,
The threat for closure for other reasons, but because
yes.
the local authority wants to do something with the building, but also they're constantly under pressure because results are no good. Well,
That's it.
you can have
And
drama in a school in which the results are also very good.
yeah. You can, yeah. And you talk about the closure. Yeah, there's also the merger. Oh no, we've got a merger of
Oh yeah,
another school and no one likes each other. It's like,
yeah,
okay, again. But we'll talk about Grange Hill later, but yeah, that was a big thing, and it did happen in Grange Hill, the big merger. Um, for me, we spoke about the ties, but also just sitting there drinking Coke at the desks happens all the time.
mm,
Just ignored by teachers. Just these little things that they've got to show the relationship on the screen of that student and that member of staff, and they just forget about the way that these things would not be accepted in a school. And if a teacher, some teachers don't follow up classroom management, then they will be, they will be challenged and that will be changed. It's just too many different lazy conversations with between
yeah,
teachers and staff that just don't happen in real life.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I
Ken,
think very much
sorry, Ollie, my old friend Ken Barlow. I don't think he had a positive relationship with a single kid in his whole career.
right.
He was crabby with all of them before they abused him and walked out when the bell rang. And yet, this is
Yeah.
a guy that had been teaching English and was one of the senior teachers for donkey's years. It
Yeah.
just,
Now
and then
we'll
he
come
go,
to good ones later, but there are some. I'm gonna maybe surprise you with some good teaching ones, but most
okay,
of them, yeah, they're not the best. They're not the best teachers, and as you say, Ken Barlow would have, yeah, he would have presented very senior levels in his career, and suddenly, if he's had a row with Deirdre, well, he's useless at work for the day. Well, come on, it's not quite that simple.
yeah, exactly. There's
Yeah,
plenty of that.
amusing. But again, the worry I suppose we may both have is some people are going to see that as normal, and it isn't. Yeah, we know it's drama, but I like what you said about the 99.99 recurring, but that's not interesting to the average
No,
writer
no,
because
no,
it's just not going to sell, I suppose,
no.
viewing figures. Um, so, have you got any personal stories about how a film or television show has influenced your own perception of education, perhaps growing up or being
Yeah,
profession?
yeah. I'm going to go for Hearts and Minds, which I think
Right.
was Channel 4 again. It was a Jimmy Govan drama from 1995, featured Chris Eccleston as a young, again, I think English teacher, I could be wrong, who came into a Liverpool comprehensive, and it was filmed in the city. It's written by Jimmy McGovern, who we know is a peerless
Yep.
TV dramatist. We've seen all of his work, often focused, of course, in Liverpool. And he, I believe, a bit like Barry Hines, had been a teacher in the city. So it was again steeped in the reality of what it was like. And typical of Jimmy McGovern's work, it was hard hitting, but true. I mean, I'd been teaching about, 6 years. And it was like, oh, at last, as I alluded to before, it'd been please, sir, and Grange Hill. And that was it. And then suddenly
Yeah.
this came along, and I thought, oh my God, this is the language is right, the way the kids are, the way the teachers speak, the issues are not overblown. This guy had a few issues in his life, but it was more about how he was struggling at school to assert himself and and develop and maintain relationships with staff and pupils. It was just authentic and not exaggerated. And it was little things that you knew had to be written by a teacher because there was one conversation I remember. One of the guys in his department had been there years. He was a very laid back guy. The kids loved him, but he wasn't. He was a bit of a maverick. We've
Yep.
talked about this before they existed,
Yep.
and again, this is very authentic. You never get this in Ackley Bridge. Eccleston was getting behind with his marking, and he was killing himself, staying up a whole night marking English essays to a very high degree if it was English. And this guy, and he looked dreadful in the morning. This guy sat next to him in the staff room and said, "What's up?" He said, I'm exhausted, all this marking. He said, "You don't need to be bothering with any of that." He said, "All the kids here, inner city Liverpool kids leading to a time." He was a guy from Liverpool. He said, "They just want a big tick, mate. Just give them a big tick and say, well done, and they're happy. They don't want all that other shit." And he was like left there, wide eyed. But you would have met somebody like that. That's a conversation that teachers would have and still have
Yeah.
today. There's somebody I know at the moment who's really struggling with marking and catching up and trying to find the best systems for doing it. And the point was, it was because it's Jimmy McGovern, he can turn realistic situations into drama that the wider world will find interesting. Because
Yes.
normally only teachers would be remotely interested in such a boring detail. Let's be honest. But that's the great gift of somebody that's born to do what he does, because he can both make the drama attractive to a wide audience whilst convincing the people in the know, us the teachers, this
Mm,
is right, isn't it? And I think that's quite a trick. So that's the one. And from then on, I've measured everything against it really, and
right. Oh, yeah.
most hasn't stood up to it. Sadly, in 1995 is a long time ago now. So
Certainly
where are
is.
you, Jimmy? Can we have another one? Stop writing about
Ah,
prison and come
brilliant.
back to teaching, please. Yeah, you.
Brilliant.
What about yourself? Have you got anything that stands out?
Um, well, it's I was really interested younger watching the film Made in Britain.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah, that's Alan Clark film
right. Yeah,
with Tim Roth as
yeah. Not.
16, 17-year-old
Yeah,
racist
I don't think I've
skinhead.
seen. I don't think I've seen that. So tell me about that.
Oh, it's an amazing film. It's yeah, Tim Roth is just basically he's a young offender
Right.
and he's an intelligent young offender who's racist
Okay.
and yeah, outwardly racist. A lot of
Yeah.
racism.
Yeah.
There was a lot of the very early 80s. It was
Yeah.
highly
Oh yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately it's big in the news in Britain. And yeah, he gets a social worker and he gets put into juvenile detention, and it's kind of a never-ending circle. And for me, it's really there's this one speech by the welfare officer. This is like the final speech of how he's behaving in school, and he's going to school for a while, he's okay for a while, then he starts, bunking off, being rude to teachers, and he goes and commits silly crime. And it's really there's this excellent speech by the I think it's like a superintendent there in the juvenile detention, which talks about the cycle of poverty. And he kind of says that here's where you are, here's your attitude to education. And he keeps going around about the repetitive nature of what he does wrong. And then, well, actually, it's going to escalate now. It's your last chance before you get heavily into crime and you're going to go to
Yeah.
prison. And you've got this really hard as nails lad who suddenly, as pointed out by the people when the superintendent leaves, is quiet. And it just for a minute, you see the flicker of him realizing the importance of education.
Right.
Not he's never going to go back to school and to probably study hard for his exams or anything, but it's really interesting how he sees the flicker of it and he's
Yeah.
lost for words. And then once what you would say the hard authority figure leaves, the
Yeah.
racist lad, Trevor, he's called, turns back to his old self. So it's a really interesting film. And this speech, I think it's on YouTube as its own speech, but it goes from this guy who's rejecting education, he hates the teachers, he hates everyone because he's more British than them. He's got these real twisted,
Right.
horrible reasons. But then when he gets it, well, this is going to happen. The realization's there, and it's fantastic. And when that person goes, he's got to act the big man again. So yeah, for me, that was really interesting in seeing how me, who was someone who's always valued education, who's always wanted to be in the net, interesting to see someone who's got the courage not I wanted to have the courage to break out of it and then to realize actually maybe I should have stayed in it. But
Right.
then he hasn't, for whatever reason, he's not strong enough to stay in within education in the film. So I would definitely recommend that. And that did quite have an impression on me because I saw that well before I became a teacher.
Right. I'll seek it out. I was just about to say, you mentioned YouTube. I checked because I knew we were gonna do this. Hearts and Minds is on there. I can't. It was like a three or four part, a typical,
Right.
you know,
I will definitely watch that. I
over.
haven't seen
Yeah.
that. That's
I
great.
think you'll find that on there. You'll have a look yourself. I think you'll probably agree with me that a bit of a timepiece now because it's a while ago, but
Yeah.
still stands up.
So linking on to that, any other shows or examples from shows that you do believe show an accurate depiction of life in schools and how, if at all, how could they help new teachers looking at coming into the profession?
Yeah, I'd still go to again. Hearts and Minds would be one that
Yep.
stands out. Again, it's a while ago, but it would be good actually for new teachers today to look at it and go, "What's the same and what's changed?"
Right.
Because 1995 is a long time ago, but it's not ancient history.
No.
Easy for me to say, but
Nah.
I think that would be. It's always good to know what used to be in place, what the teaching used to be like. You can't treat it as well. This is the way it is now. Forget about the past.
Yeah.
because then the future can catch up with you, and you can get into trouble in that regard. So I think that one, even that little thing about marking, it's never gone away. It's still one of the big tensions that new teachers have.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think preeminent is Kes, based on
Yes.
obviously Barry Harron's novel A Kestrel for a Knave, which when I was teaching English, I taught many times. Kids always loved. The film is just wonderful. It's a great piece of British cinema by Ken Loach, of course. Probably his best ever film, I think. Again, for all the reasons we said, written by a teacher that taught in that school about those kids and about those
Yeah.
teachers, and very much of its day. Some of the set piece scenes are still classics of their kind. We all love the football lesson, and anybody that
Brilliant.
hasn't seen, just go on YouTube and find football Kes, and
Brilliant.
it's one of the greatest comedic scenes ever in British cinema, with the wonderful, peerless Brian Glover playing. Was it Mr. Sugden, wasn't it, or was that the English teacher? I can't remember. But anyway, just a laugh a second and beautifully done. But the head teacher and how he when he was with corporal punishment in those days and how he dealt with kids. There's just
Yes.
I mean, it was about obviously a boy, a very neglected boy, and his love for the pet kestrel he found and
Yes.
trained. But there was so much of it in school, and even today, I can't fault it. It would have been exactly what teaching in Barnsley in the late 60s was like. I'm going to mention more for him than his comedy, and that's Man Down with Greg Davis. Now,
Right.
he plays a teacher who's one of those chaotic, larger than life teachers, and it's very very silly. It's a very very silly comedy, but it's a very good. It's a laugh. You're not supposed to take it seriously. But the thing about Greg Davis was he was a drama teacher, and the,
Right.
the
Yeah, it
thing
was.
that even if you don't like Man Down, I'd suggest people find his about his Netflix stand-up show from about 2022, I think it was the last one he did, and he talks a lot about teaching.
Yes.
Um, you know, he tells a great story of when he met some of the girls he used to teach years after he'd left and got into stand-up comedy and television, and he bumped into them, we were laughing about the past, and he said, "Oh, sir, you were a great laugh, but you were a shit teacher." And he said, "Well, that just confirmed it." Um, I'm going to go even further back. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a classic from a long, long, long time ago. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Have you ever seen with
Yes,
Robert
I have.
Donat?
Yes.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Obviously, anybody watching today would think, what world am I looking at? But it was about what stood out was the long standing relationship with one school, with the guy that was there his whole career and was even teaching grandchildren at the end.
Yeah.
There was one boy called Collie, I think the surname was, and he got to like the grandson of this boy, Collie.
Brilliant.
But it was about the affection that teachers can have for one school, that the kids have for a teacher. He started off and he was bullied. He was hopeless, a complete wimp. But he became like a cornerstone of the school by the time he'd finished and was a legend there. And actually quite moving on his he did eventually. He was very much an avowed bachelor into middle age. He eventually found a woman that he could love, and they got married. They didn't have children, couldn't have children, and I think pretty much on his deathbed, he was asked, or very late in life when he'd retired, "Mr. Chips, did you ever have children?" And he said, "No." He said, "I didn't have children," but he said, "But I did really, thousands and thousands of them, and all
Brilliant.
boys, because it was a boys' school." And just to move away, if you'll indulge me for an extra couple of minutes, if just to go away from Britain, just for a couple, the
Sure.
class set in a Paris inner city school made not many years ago, 6, 7 years ago, really, really accurate portrayal of the lives of kids living in one of the very, very rough parts of outer Paris, almost no-go areas, and how they coped between school and this very, very dangerous life outside of it. It's focused on four girls. And recently, the holdovers, which I'd highly recommend to anybody that gets to see it, that only came out about a year or so ago, about kids in the 1970s who couldn't go home. It was a American boarding school, couldn't go home. And one teacher was assigned, a very grumpy old teacher, was assigned to stay with them for the holiday because he didn't have any family. And it was about all of that. Comedic but true. So if there's a common thread, it's about reality and
Mm.
relationships, I suppose. I think that's it. The
Just
thread is there's a thing about reality and
yeah.
truthfulness in the language, but it's also about the relationships of teachers to pupils and schools are the things that stand out in the ones I've chosen. Yourself?
Yeah, really interesting. I actually watched Kes football scene again today. I saw it. I mean, when I was a kid myself, I was always really happy that Tottenham were chosen to play Man United for oh, brilliant.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I'm probably just after the time when that kind of teaching could go on. However, there were still some in the game. So for me, it's great. But you think PE must it was so hard. If you're not good at PE in those days, like you can't hide. If you're not good at maths or whatever, not everyone's looking at your book. But if you're not good at sport and the cruelty of picking teams and you know you're the last one and it's awful and
yeah,
then you've
yeah,
got the teacher running at you, smashing the ball at you, and it's brilliant. I mean, he's a referee as well, and he retakes his own penalty. But it's just there's no hiding place for those kids, and I think it's so realistic. Even like when I was young, a lot younger in the mid 80s, it wasn't as hard as that, but there was still similarities. But for
yeah,
me, it's even the sound of the ball hitting the goalpost. I
yeah.
mean, it's so different a bit
Evocative.
later, but
Yeah, evocative.
absolutely brilliant scene. And just a brilliant scene for that teacher as well.
I mean,
Actually,
any.
yeah, go on.
Sorry, Ollie.
No, I was going to move on to another show. So you want
No,
to add
I
on
was
to?
just going to say, just to reaffirm, if anybody's out there who's a teacher and has never seen Kes,
Yeah,
they really need to watch it.
yeah,
And they just must. It's just, unforgivable that you don't. Sorry,
it's
off you go.
brilliant. No, I was just going to say, an ex-colleague of ours used to start calling me Mr. Chips because an English teacher. He said, "Oh, you're just like Mr. Chips." So he joined after us. I won't name him on here, but yeah, brought back good memories. Um, we've mentioned Grange Hill now. For me, as I said, I have started watching it again, and I think there are some good points from Grange Hill. I know
Yeah,
we mentioned earlier you had the school merger, etc. You know, a bit of a trope, but what I liked about Grange Hill was that, and I was only young when I started watching it, like most people, but it was apparently the first to deal on a kids' TV show with issues like racism in
yeah, it
schools,
was.
and
Yeah,
of course, bullying and parent divorce and self-harming it went to. So I think
yeah,
that was really good
yeah,
as the pioneer for doing that. But for me, what I liked about it, watching it now, is I'm quite interested in modern politics, so 80s Britain. Now, actually, the way they talk about cuts and stuff, the early 80s, there wasn't much money around. And so for me, characters like, Suzanne, who obviously Michelle Fowler, obviously to some
yeah,
in EastEnders, how they dealt with, well, they were clever kids and they weren't necessarily bad kids, but well, what is out there for me? So I thought that was quite good, and it's now very dated, but that's a good thing in a way because if you can look at how society was in that period,
yeah,
now when you got to the late 80s, it became more of a silly cartoon comedy show.
yeah,
But I think for its first few series, even had a couple of deaths of children in there.
yeah, they
It
did.
was quite interesting. And I think the teacher portrayal of Mr. Baxter, also a PE teacher, was more of the PE teacher
Yeah,
probably 20 years later than Brian Glover's character. The hard as nails to your face, but he cared. And there's all these great scenes where he saw another teacher doing wrong and he sorted that teacher out because they were his kids. And I love the way that they'd say, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," and he go, "No, sir." And it was just really funny that he was a tough guy, Mr. Baxter, but he had a soft side, but he knew when to let the kids do it, know it, sorry, and he knew when not to kids know, and not to let the kids know it. So I thought Grange Hill in its early days isn't too bad. We don't, obviously they're going to focus on the big dramas, but one good thing it focuses on, in my opinion, is for many kids, going into that classroom isn't the most important thing in their day. It's what's gone on the corridor beforehand, and
sure.
has your girlfriend just spoken to the boy you don't like? And I think that's
Yeah,
really interesting. They slump into French or whatever without their book ready, and the teacher goes mad, and you think, that does happen. So yeah, I think. I think that was something that I thought was not obviously there for complete accuracy, and the acting isn't the best, but I think the writing, Phil Redmond's, I think the writing's quite
Yeah,
good. I
yeah,
don't know if
yeah,
he's a teacher
absolutely.
himself, but I think it's quite well written.
Yeah, but he was writing Brookside at the same time, and
Right.
that was quite gritty, wasn't it, too, for a
Yes.
soap at the time. The thing I would suggest about Grange Hill is that it's probably one of the few, well, yeah, probably one of the few afternoon children's television programs, and the kids came home from school that they watched with their parents. I think a
Yes.
lot of parents would probably watch that because of that kind of bled through into adult themes
Yeah.
or themes that the adults, the parents would find important to talk to their kids about. Those that did
Yeah.
in those
Oh,
days.
definitely.
It still stands up, yeah, and it
Yeah.
launched a lot of careers, didn't it?
Oh, it
I
did.
think it was a solid piece of work, and the kids loved it. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it was great for kids to come home from school and see themselves reflected, on the
Well, I
screen.
think listening to a podcast called Sausage on a Fork, where he's interviewing the old
Yeah,
characters, and they all say the same thing. It was the first time that kids could see themselves on the screen because they weren't all cool kids. They weren't all good looking.
no,
They were somewhat
no,
disheveled, and you had people dealing with spots, growing up with, as I say, loneliness, parent divorcing, and yeah, it had something for everyone. It was, and you had the legends like Tucker, the cool naughty kids, but you had portrayals of other
yeah.
students we saw ourselves.
So for example, Roland, who was the rather
Yes.
portly young man, wasn't he? Who
Yeah.
was bullied, and he had his one friend, didn't he? The one girl that befriended him. She was a bit of a and that she was a bit of a loner too,
Janet.
because I think
Yeah.
she was off colour, wasn't she? And I think
Yeah.
she had
And he
probably.
didn't appreciate her though. He didn't appreciate
Well,
her at
but this is the point is that this idea that bullying is also always very physical,
all.
or
Yeah.
it's done with an acid tongue, and kids are constantly being
Yeah.
slaughtered. It's not. It's often just ostracized,
Yeah.
neglected,
Yeah.
sidelined, not involved,
Yeah.
overlooked.
Mm.
That's actually more the case often than the stuff that dramas would usually rely on
Yeah.
in showing us the lives of the kids that aren't popular.
Yeah. No, very good point. So I think, yeah, early, I'd say yes, yeah, 1 to 7 maybe series. I think it's good. It's good.
Yeah,
So on the other side, you have mentioned a few dodgy ones, but talk about some of the worst offenders in portraying education on screen.
yeah. Well, I've talked about Ken Barlow. I won't go back to Ken because it's getting unfair, to be
Poor old
honest.
Ken.
So I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if Coronation Street brought him back as a supply teacher at 94 or simply because they needed him. Weatherfield Comprehensive needed him. I think the soaps in general.
Yeah.
I mean, EastEnders obviously had a lot of young characters who were at school. I think they probably more sensibly never really bothered with school. I can't remember a scene
No.
in all the time. I don't watch any of them anymore that EastEnders ever had in school. Maybe they'd seen Ken Barlow and thought we're not
Very
going there.
later on, I don't watch it anymore, but I'd say, yeah, not maybe like around 10 years ago, they had a couple, but not much. Not much.
Yeah, and I'd extend that to Ackley Bridge and Waterloo Road, which are soaps. They are soaps
Yeah.
set in a school. And I'm not going to you can't get offended by them, but they're just because there's so many, because they get large viewerships and they're kind of the current thing, or certainly, well, they remained on. I think they're both still on, not sure. Waterloo
Yeah.
Road, I think, is back this week, I
I think
noticed.
it
But
is. We don't, my wife used to love it, but we don't watch it anymore.
okay, so those two kind of long-standing offenders. We've mentioned Police, I mean, I know it was a comedy, but I mean, God, about as
You know
bad as
what?
it gets.
Sorry to interrupt. The worst thing about Please Sir was the henpecked head, who was probably, as you say, 80 odd, henpecked by his secretary.
Yeah.
It was just a typical 70s trope of the weak man who's a child and a strong woman, but she was overly strong and nagging. It's just terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah. To Sir with Love, we've mentioned, Sidney Poitier, not realistic in any way sense. It was a good film. Sidney Poitier was a great actor
Yeah,
with great presence, of course, and it was
yeah,
an important message to get across because it delved obviously into racism and the lives of inner city children and neglect and all of those things. But and was a good film in that regard. But they didn't really need to set it in the school to achieve that. And whoever wrote that knew nothing about schools. Notes on a Scandal. I've said I just found it um, a little bit sinister in its portrayal of people. Even the woman who was it play? I can't remember her name now. It'll come back to me. Very good actress who played the teacher who bubbled. and chased and confronted the teacher who was having an affair with the pupil. She was just so stereotypical as the old hatchet-faced female teacher, followed the rules um, without ever deviating from them. It was just,
Right.
I just didn't like it at all. I've mentioned the teacher was Sheridan Smith, who just what they decided. I think again, Channel 4, I think was it Channel 5, decided we're going to do our own notes on assembly, and it was just an appalling piece of work. I don't like Sheridan Smith. I think she's completely overrated. A lot of people will
Right.
disagree with me and shout at me. She's not for me. Teachers, I think it set itself up as about schools, but wasn't really. It was about just young people who happened to be teachers. Didn't really add anything really to
No.
the genre. Um, Jack Whitehall's Bad Education. So you could stand Jack Whitehall's Bad Education next to Greg Davis's Man Down. Go for Man Down. That's all I'm going to say. And let's mention In-Betweeners.
Yeah, I was going to come to
It's
that.
clearly not to be taken seriously. And of course, we ourselves actually know personally one of the. Did you know James Buckley? Because I think
I didn't teach. I was at the school when he was, but I didn't teach him. No.
yeah, because James Buckley, of course, when I first went to the school that we both taught at in East London, was in the final year. They were a very gifted actor, and he knew it. And he knew
Nah.
it, by the way. Um, but what's your? I mean, I was never a massive fan of the In-Betweeners, but and obviously very funny. And I do see clips and think, yeah, that's brilliant comedy. Did you watch that?
Yes, I.
So what
I'm,
about the
I'm
school element? Did they even
right.
remotely try to get it right, or did they not bother at
No,
all?
that's the thing. I mean, for the four lads, of course, yeah, all caricatures, but there was some realism in how 16-year-old boys are. Now, of
Yeah,
course, they went over the top for the comedy, but their search for girls, their search to be cool, I think was good. I think the back where it let itself down was, the Greg Davis head of sixth form. You wouldn't be so like that to kids. It just wouldn't happen. Now, yes, just say it was a comedy, but the teacher was, too rude, and then you had again, you had to have the perverted teacher in the first episode, or one of them, and it was a bit silly with the school. I think they had to be set in a school because that's where they are in
yeah,
their life.
yeah.
Any older, and it wouldn't be funny anymore. But I think, yeah, the schooling part wasn't the best. However, I think it was funny, and I think it quite correctly portrayed four boys trying to fit in, trying to get girlfriends. So I think it was good, funny, but the school bit wasn't very good. Right,
Okay.
the portrayal of the teachers, especially the head of sixth form. Yeah, I know he's been, Mr. Horrible to the kids, but yeah, sometimes the scene goes where he was so rude, you think, well, but that wouldn't happen in real life. So what's you've lost the episode's now lost all credibility.
Before I forget, by the way, there is a school called Grange Hill in London, secondary
Oh, right.
school, and I
Oh,
visited
cool.
it. Yeah,
And I forgot to say to you as well that unfortunately, as I said, after the good period, a good character, Faye Lucas, who grew up in strong periods, what did she do? Had an affair with a teacher. So it
yeah.
had to stick it in the end. Nothing, nowhere else to go. So yeah, okay. Now we've spoken about not portraying education accurately. So how important do you think it is to do that, or can we just say yeah, it's not really like that, but that's just the basis of the drama or the joke?
I think it's at the end of the day, drama has to come first. It's entertainment, but there is a
Yeah,
duty of care to some degree. I mean,
yeah,
if you were to watch anybody talking about the police, Dixon or Doc Green, compared to some of the high levels of realism we see today, sometimes hyper realism
yeah,
in police procedurals. I think there's a duty of care to at least try,
yes,
not to patronize the public by giving them nonsense that doesn't bear any resemblance and lazy writing. I think that's important. And I think certainly when it comes to portraying, pupil teacher relationships and
yes,
to portraying children with special needs
yes,
and to bullying and sexual abuse and parental abuse and all of those things that come into schools and schools have to deal with. If you're going to set your stall out to do a drama in school in which those things are happening or involved, you've got to try and get it right. You're not going to do anybody favors by just writing nonsense that isn't in any way accurate. You've got to push it because it's drama, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think there's a balance to be had. As long as if you've got Waterloo Road and Ackley Bridge, which don't even pretend really to be accurate, that's fine. They're not pretending that somebody can tell me, they can email me and us and tell us that I'm wrong. I don't think Waterloo Road or Ackley Bridge have dealt with extreme special needs and sexual abuse coming
Mm.
in from home lives into the school. I could be wrong. I think they'd steer clear of that, and for good reason. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to make it central to the drama, for God's sake, do your research and talk to the right people. Um,
I totally agree. I think there
yeah,
is a duty of care. I think it's how the school responds on the screen to that needs to
yeah,
be accurate. And as we've said before, there are bad people in every profession, but don't overdo the school responding badly to whatever need the child has because people might think, well, that is the reality. And I don't believe that it is. I think also, yeah, the way, we've got, I think filmmakers or TV makers need to be aware that just if anything else, kids are watching this and they're going into school, and if they're mistakenly thinking that's the way you can talk to a teacher or you can get away with it because it's been done on the show before. I'm sure we've all had, I think, a few experiences maybe of that, or just catchphrases from school shows that come in, easily put out, no problem. But I think, yeah, I think there is something there that needs to be have a little bit of thought behind it, especially as, yeah, as I said, people, these are real life situations, people are going into them, and yeah, I think it mainly does happen that from what I've seen, and I say you've seen far more than me, but yeah, the people that do wrong generally they get their comeuppance, but not
yeah,
always. But
no.
and that doesn't always happen in real life. But I think it's got to be some segment of reality, just because people are sitting watching that at home and then they're going to school the next day, or their children are going to school the next day.
Yeah, and I suppose
Um,
it also have some negative impact on recruitment into the profession, which is always a problem, of course,
But
continues
that
to
was
be
my
difficult.
next question. Do you think
Oh,
any other problems with that? I mean, yeah, I think yeah. Look, if I was sat at home and I was watching, I haven't watched Waterloo Road for years, but God, I think, my God, do I really want to go and see that every day of my career? So, anything else you think might be negative in incorrect portrayals of education?
that would be the one that stands out. I mean,
Yeah,
this fixation on school failure and the
yeah,
idea that the profession is on the point of collapse at any one point. I think that can have an insidious sort of impact. Beyond that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I still think people. Again, I think people know the difference between reality and drama, and there's probably some cognitive dissonance for those that do occasionally
sure.
believe they're watching something that's true, but know secretly that it's not. I think the public is intelligent enough to know that this is just silly, and I'm not going to take it too seriously. It's hard to think beyond that. I think if we were two coppers or former coppers or doctors working in the
Sure.
NHS talking about how that can be portrayed wrong, then I think there is. I mean, I think some hospital dramas and police procedurals have probably caused a lot of harm
Mm,
because they've been seen as supposedly serious and accurate. So we're not talking Dixon or Dock Green or something that happens in EastEnders, and yet they've portrayed systems and how they operate and how cases are investigated and evidence is collected.
yeah.
I think that can be quite problematic. There will be some of that in schools, but I don't think to the same degree. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And what you find or I find, I believe, is it's slightly more repetitive in school shows. We've kind of discussed it today. You're getting the same older schools closing. Oh, there's no more money. Oh, let's do a sponsored fun run. Oh no,
Yeah,
it's repeated a lot more perhaps than in police or hospitals where yeah, I mean there's certainly a lot they're dealing with crimes in police, for example. Yeah, so I would agree with that.
okay.
Um, so just finally on this topic then, I mean we've spoken about the need for at least some accuracy in dealing with real world issues like bullying, mental health,
Yeah.
special educational needs on the screen. I mean, are there ethical challenges, do you think, for writers, and how should these be handled sensitively? Because it is the real world, and let's say we're talking, not perhaps the more soapy, overly
Yeah,
comedic ones like In Betweeners, but just generally the different types of issues
yeah.
going on in school.
I would be very, very, very surprised if any professional scriptwriter, novelist, dramatist who's going to write about schools and wants to write about, profound special needs, for example, is not doing their research. I think the research that probably wasn't done in the dim and distant past when those sorts of children, for example, were not portrayed, they were kind of just left out, weren't they? They didn't exist.
Yep.
I think that's probably a thing of the past. And then the commissioning editors and the other, it's a very different world. I think they'd probably have to go through so many filters before they would get onto the screen these days, if it's supposed to
Yeah, I
be
think so.
serious drama, that it's unlikely to make the cut if it doesn't go through those
Sure.
systems and get the okay. I think somewhere along the line, somebody would have to say, we're going to have to check this because we can't portray this if it's going to have a detrimental effect on families and individuals
Sure.
and those sorts of things. You can take that too far. There's no doubt that you can smother artistic license and creativity by making sure that every box is ticked and everything's exactly as it should be. You're not going to end up
Sure.
with much of a drama. So again, it's about getting the balance right, and the best writers can do that. I said Jimmy McGovern. He's always managed to do that. It's always drama, so it's elevated, but you always feel as if those people exist and those
Yeah.
places exist, and the way people speak is kind of the way those people speak. And as long as we've got writers and commissioning editors on television and film who are prepared to have those high standards, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
It is, I think, the best way of putting it, if that
I think
works.
I think so. And I think I agree. It's a lot more prevalent now. I mean, I was listening to a podcast, what that Grange Hill one, the actor who played Danny Kendall
Yeah,
in the 80s, and he said, look, now it'd have been diagnosed of probably ADHD or something. I myself, having watched a bit back, yeah, you can see a lot of communication issues, not mentioned in the show whatsoever, just
no,
shouted at by teachers all day. Probably quite accurate, but I think nowadays that would there'd definitely be some explanation and some meetings to show that this is a student who needs their own plan in
yeah,
schools, and this is how schools would deal with it. So yeah, I agree. I think it's probably it does need to be dealt with properly, just so we don't start yeah, demonizing people, which has been done in the past. Like you spoke about Roland before, probably quite accurate. A lot of his classmates did isolate him. There was name calling, but it wasn't. There was a little bit of counselling, but only it was done really badly. Now, whether
yeah,
or not that's reflecting how badly it was done in the early 80s, but it was just the council wasn't interested whatsoever in Roland or the reasons why. But I think more now, if you were dealing with that, you should and would have more of more accuracy in how the school's going to respond to that.
yeah.
Cool. Right, well, I think that's about it for this episode. So I've really enjoyed that talk on teaching education in television and film in the UK mainly, with a few other bits thrown in by you. Um, yeah, it's certainly given me a few things to go. And What Hearts and Minds is one I'm going to go and
Oh
watch
yeah.
my next, I think. And yeah, I hope if you're new to the profession, you've you've got some ideas about what it's like on the screen in reality, and interested in our ideas on it. And what I would say to everybody is, yeah, please like this video on YouTube. Please share it with your colleagues. Please subscribe to us. And if you have any questions, any comments, please leave a message on YouTube or email us. The email address is Terry and Olly Talk Teaching at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time this evening, Terry. And I look forward to the next time.
And to you, Ollie, say hello to Japan.
And to
Bye
England.
now.
Cheers.